In a world where power and money control everything, there are those willing to sacrifice it all to protect the truth. Lena, a young environmental lawyer, never imagined her life would change forever after an unimaginable event. A shocking discovery will lead her into a battle against one of the most powerful corporations in the world, Cromwell Industries. And as the truth is exposed, it's not just the planet's future at stake, it's their very lives. But as they begin to unravel dark secrets, they realize their enemies are not just shadowy criminals. This is a force so powerful, it's deeply rooted in every corner of society. So who really controls the world? And can they win before it's too late? This isn't just a battle against greed. It's a fight for the future, for the planet, and for the truth. Join Lena and her team as they race against time, where every decision could change the fate of the world. The story begins, right now. Lena Storm, an accomplished environmental lawyer, woke up in a sterile, white hospital room. The sharp smell of antiseptic stung her senses, and a dull ache pulsed through her body. The cold, uncomfortable hospital bed beneath her made it hard to focus. As her eyes adjusted to the faint light from the window, she felt a sense of dread creep over her. There was something off, something about the accident that had led her here. The car crash. She had been on her way to a crucial meeting regarding the controversial Titan Energy project, a massive corporation notorious for its disregard for environmental laws. The crash was suspicious, too sudden, too violent. It couldn't have been a simple accident. She remembered the fleeting glimpse of her husband, Gabriel, before the darkness overtook her. He had been there, standing in front of the wrecked car, his expression cold. But that wasn't the only shock. Lena's thoughts spiraled, and she quickly found out from her estranged brother, Darren, that her suspicions were correct. Gabriel had been cheating on her. Worse, Lena discovered that her husband's affair wasn't the only betrayal, he was connected to something much darker. Titan Energy, the very corporation she had been working to expose for illegal activities, was linked to her recent accident. And the more Lena thought about it, the more she wondered if her father's death, years ago in a mysterious car crash, had been connected to the same people. Darren, who hadn't spoken to Lena in years, resurfaced unexpectedly. He had secrets of his own. He had been investigating Titan Energy under the radar, suspecting the company of more than just environmental violations. Now, he feared the worst, that Titan Energy had played a role in their father's death, and that they were now targeting Lena. As Lena recovered, Darren didn't mince words. He presented her with evidence he had been gathering for months, emails, photographs, insider testimonies, that pointed to Titan Energy's involvement in illegal drilling, human rights violations in remote communities, and a network of bribery that reached deep into the government. The company wasn't just destroying the environment. It was destroying people's lives, and they were willing to kill anyone who stood in their way. With the pressure mounting, Lena turned to her trusted colleague, Marcus, and a private investigator named Neil, both of whom had long-standing knowledge of Titan Energy's corruption. They began digging deeper, uncovering more chilling truths. Titan Energy had been funding black operations to silence journalists, activists, and whistleblowers who threatened to expose the company's darkest secrets. But they hadn't expected Lena to survive the crash, or to keep fighting. Then came the moment that shattered Lena's world completely. Gabriel, her husband, confessed that he had been working with Titan Energy for years. The affair wasn't the only betrayal, he had been feeding them inside information about Lena's legal cases. His involvement went deeper than she could have imagined, and his position within the company gave him access to sensitive information. Gabriel wasn't just unfaithful. He was complicit in a scheme to take down Lena's career and neutralize her as a threat to the company. Her heart heavy with rage and betrayal, Lena faced the impossible choice: expose Gabriel and risk losing everything, her marriage, her life as she knew it, or allow him to continue his treasonous work. She felt the walls closing in around her. It wasn't until Lena's childhood friend, Kate, a brilliant hacker, became involved that the pieces finally started to fall into place. Kate uncovered classified documents revealing that Titan Energy was planning to build a massive drilling operation near the Whispering Pines Reserve, a protected forest and wildlife sanctuary that Lena had spent years fighting to protect. The operation, if allowed to proceed, would decimate an entire ecosystem and result in the deaths of countless species. But the revelation was far more terrifying. Titan Energy's plans were not just about the environment, they were about control. They were willing to go to any lengths to protect their power, including eliminating anyone who stood in their way. With the evidence in hand, Lena knew she couldn't back down. She had to act quickly to prevent the irreversible destruction of the Whispering Pines Reserve. As she prepared for the final confrontation with Titan Energy, Lena received a call that would change everything. Darren, who had been operating undercover as an undercover agent for the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, revealed that he had known about Titan Energy's involvement in their father's death all along. He had been working on bringing the company down from the inside. The revelation hit Lena like a ton of bricks. Her brother, the one she had thought was distant and untrustworthy, had been risking his life for years to gather the evidence needed to take down Titan Energy. He had been playing a dangerous game, and now it was time for all the pieces to come together. The final showdown came at Titan Energy's headquarters, where Lena and her team, Marcus, Neil, Kate, and Darren, confronted the company's CEO, Victor Crane. The confrontation was tense. Crane, a ruthless and calculating man, had no intention of backing down. The battle of words quickly escalated into something far more dangerous. Lena exposed the company's illegal activities on a live broadcast, presenting the incriminating evidence they had gathered. It was a desperate, high-stakes gamble, but Lena was determined to see it through. Crane, in a final act of defiance, ordered security to remove them, but the truth was already out. The broadcast had gone viral, and law enforcement was already on the way. The arrest of Victor Crane was just the beginning. Lena knew it wasn't over, not yet. The aftermath of the showdown left Lena shaken, but determined. Her testimony before Congress exposed Titan Energy's global network of corruption, and soon, investigations were launched into every branch of the company. Public outrage was fierce, and the corporation's operations came to a screeching halt. But it wasn't a complete victory. Titan Energy's deep connections in politics and business meant that Lena knew they were far from finished. Crane's arrest was just a small victory in a much larger war. Gabriel, who had been arrested for his role in the conspiracy, tried to plead for Lena's forgiveness. But Lena couldn't find it in her heart to forgive him, not after everything he had done. Their marriage ended, and Lena was left to pick up the pieces of her personal life, all while the fight for environmental justice continued. With Titan Energy's downfall, Lena knew it wasn't the end of the road. There were countless other corporations out there, just as dangerous, just as ruthless. And Lena had just made herself a target. In the months that followed, Lena found herself at a crossroads. She could return to her work as a lawyer, continue to fight the good fight, or she could step into something bigger. She chose to build something new. Lena founded Green Horizon, a non-profit organization dedicated to holding corporations accountable for their environmental crimes. With Marcus, Kate, and Neil by her side, Lena set out to change the world, one case at a time. Kate continued to hack into corporate systems, uncovering illegal activities, while Marcus and Neil worked behind the scenes, gathering intelligence. Darren, now fully committed to the cause, wrote a book about their father's legacy and the fight against Titan Energy. Lena became a symbol of hope for environmental activists everywhere. Yet, deep down, she knew that the battle was far from over. Titan Energy was just one enemy in a vast, interconnected web of corruption that spanned the globe. And as long as Lena was alive, she would continue to fight, no matter the cost. But the world had changed. And Lena Storm had become more than just a lawyer. She had become a leader in the fight for a sustainable future, a future that was still hanging by a fragile thread. And in the shadows, Titan Energy was watching, waiting for its next move. It had been 6 months since Lena Storm founded Green Horizon, and in those months, she had grown accustomed to the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. The non-profit had gained significant traction, rallying environmental activists, legal experts, and scientists alike. Her phone buzzed incessantly, with requests from various governments, NGOs, and activists from around the world asking for advice, support, or collaboration. But despite the victories, the downfall of Titan Energy, the justice for the victims of their environmental crimes, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. She had always been wary of corporate power and political influence, but what she didn't expect was how the stakes were raised the moment she exposed Titan Energy. Lena's phone rang again, interrupting her thoughts. It was Marcus, her ever-loyal friend and colleague, whose voice was always calm, even in the direst of situations. But today, there was a crack in his tone. "Lena, You need to see this, Marcus said, his voice tight. There's something you won't believe. You need to come to the office now. Lena's heart skipped a beat. Her mind raced. What could it be? Another attack? Another corporation rising from the ashes? When Lena arrived at the Green Horizon office, she found Marcus, Kate, and Darren gathered around a screen. The room was dimly lit, and their faces were illuminated only by the flickering glow of the monitor. What's going on? Lena asked, her voice filled with a mix of anxiety and determination. Kate, usually composed, looked unnerved. We've uncovered something huge. Titan Energy isn't the only company involved in these illegal operations. There's a much bigger network at play. The screen in front of them displayed a series of encrypted emails, surveillance footage, and documents, showing not just Titan Energy but several other multinational corporations and even government agencies implicated in a coordinated effort to suppress environmental laws and regulatory bodies around the world. Lena's stomach turned as she recognized the names of familiar corporations, ones that had been buying politicians, influencing environmental policy, and secretly covering up their ecological disasters. But it was the name at the center of the web that made her blood run cold: Cromwell Industries. Cromwell Industries was the shadow that had loomed over Lena's work even before Titan Energy. They were the true puppeteers behind many of the most destructive environmental policies in the world. Lena had always suspected their involvement, but seeing the evidence in front of her was a different matter altogether. It was the biggest corporate scandal she had ever encountered, far more dangerous and far-reaching than Titan Energy could ever have been. Lena turned to Darren, who had been investigating Titan Energy from the inside. Do you think Cromwell was involved in what happened to Dad? Darren met her eyes, his expression grim. It wasn't just Titan Energy. Cromwell was involved in your father's death too. They've been pulling strings for years. And it gets worse, they've started a campaign to discredit everything Green Horizon has done. They're planning something major. Lena's mind raced. She felt the walls closing in again, the same sense of fear creeping up her spine that she had felt when the investigation into Titan Energy had first started. But this time, it was bigger, more dangerous. Cromwell Industries wasn't just a corporation, it was a global network, and they would stop at nothing to maintain their control. The next few days were a blur of action and strategy. Lena, Marcus, Kate, and Darren met with other environmental leaders, lawyers, and whistleblowers who had been gathering evidence against Cromwell Industries. The conspiracy was larger than anyone had anticipated. Cromwell had infiltrated every level of government, from local councils to international organizations, and had become untouchable. But Lena refused to back down. She had faced Titan Energy before, and she could face Cromwell now. However, they needed a plan, something that would expose the network at its core and dismantle its power before it could strike back. Kate, the hacker, worked around the clock, infiltrating Cromwell's corporate systems. What she uncovered sent a chill down Lena's spine. Cromwell wasn't just involved in environmental destruction. They had been developing a new, secret project, Project Atlas, that would change the way energy was controlled worldwide, consolidating power into the hands of a few. It was a new form of energy extraction, one so dangerous that the consequences for the environment were beyond imagination. If they succeeded, it could set back years of environmental progress and put millions of lives at risk. But Kate had also discovered something even more alarming. The project was already underway in a remote location, an uninhabited part of the world, deep in the Arctic Circle. Cromwell had begun testing the technology there, and they were preparing to scale it globally. Lena knew this couldn't stand. If they didn't act fast, the world would be at the mercy of Cromwell's technology. The lives of countless people, and the future of the planet, were at risk. We need to get to the Arctic, Lena said, determination hardening her voice. We need to stop Project Atlas before it goes any further. But the path ahead was fraught with danger. Cromwell wasn't going to let anyone stand in their way. The moment Lena and her team made their move, they would be marked as enemies of the state, hunted by both the corporation and the government officials in their pocket. Lena, Marcus, Kate, and Darren prepared for the most dangerous mission of their lives. The plan was simple: infiltrate the Arctic base, gather evidence, and sabotage the project. But Lena knew that nothing about this would be simple. They would need all the help they could get, and they couldn't afford to trust anyone who wasn't fully committed to the cause. As they traveled north, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking straight into a trap. Every step they took brought them closer to a conflict they weren't sure they could survive. But one thing was clear: if they didn't act now, the world would face a future controlled by Cromwell Industries. Arriving at the edge of the Arctic Circle, they prepared for the final leg of the journey. The cold was biting, and the isolation was unnerving. The Arctic, vast and desolate, seemed like the perfect place for Cromwell to carry out their darkest ambitions, far from the watchful eyes of the world. But Lena wasn't about to let that stop her. She had been fighting this fight for too long, and she wasn't going to let the shadow of Cromwell Industries smother everything she had worked for. "We finish this here," Lena said, her voice unwavering. "For the future. For everything we've lost." With one last look at her team, Lena stepped into the cold night, ready to face whatever horrors awaited them in the heart of Cromwell's Arctic base. The wind howled like a beast in the night as Lena, Marcus, Kate, and Darren trekked deeper into the Arctic. The bitter cold cut through their layers of clothing, but they couldn't afford to let up, not now. The remote location of Cromwell's base, nestled beneath a frozen plateau, was meant to deter anyone from approaching. It was an area so inhospitable that even satellite surveillance had difficulty tracking it. But Lena knew that if they were going to expose the truth, they had to push through. They traveled for hours, each step bringing them closer to the heart of Cromwell's operations. The snow underfoot was thick and unyielding, and the skies, a never-ending stretch of gray, made it feel as though they were walking through some vast, empty void. Kate was the first to notice the faint glow in the distance, a soft, unnatural light that seemed to pulse in the darkness. "There," she said, pointing toward the light. "It's their base. We're getting close." Lena squinted through the snowstorm, trying to make sense of what lay ahead. The glow illuminated a faint outline of buildings, barely visible in the swirling snow. They had reached their destination. The Arctic base was a fortress. The lights were dim but constant, an eerie beacon in the unyielding wilderness. Satellite images had shown it to be well fortified with guards and high-tech security systems. The surrounding area was littered with concealed surveillance cameras and motion sensors. It would be nearly impossible to get inside without detection. But they didn't have the luxury of time. The operation was already underway, and every minute they wasted brought them closer to disaster. Kate had hacked into Cromwell's communication network earlier, gaining valuable intel on the layout of the base. She had located a weak point in the security, an access point near the eastern edge of the compound, where the perimeter was less guarded. It was a risky move, but they didn't have another option. "We move fast," Lena instructed. "In and out. We get the evidence, and we stop Project Atlas before they can launch it." Darren nodded, adjusting the equipment in his pack. His face was taut, his eyes focused, but Lena could see the strain beneath the surface. This mission was personal for him too. Cromwell had been responsible for their father's death, and now they were threatening the entire world. But he remained silent, as always, his focus unshakable. Marcus, ever the strategist, was already scanning the compound. "I'll stay back and keep watch. If anything goes wrong, I'll signal." Lena nodded and turned to Kate. "You ready?" Kate's fingers tightened around the device she'd been using to intercept the security feeds. "Always. Let's do this." The team moved quickly, blending into the shadows of the snowdrifts. They made their way toward the eastern edge of the base, where Kate's intel had indicated there was a security blind spot. As they neared the perimeter, Lena felt her heart rate quicken. The weight of the mission hung over her. This wasn't just a covert operation, it was a battle for the future of the planet. The access point was a small maintenance entrance, barely visible under layers of ice and snow. Kate quickly disabled the security system using a portable device, and the door creaked open, revealing a narrow corridor. The scent of cold metal and industrial machinery filled the air as they slipped inside, the hum of the base's generators vibrating through the walls. They moved quickly through the compound, taking care to avoid detection. The hallways were dimly lit, with sporadic guards patrolling at regular intervals. Kate used her tech to loop the security cameras, while Darren, with his military training, ensured they kept a safe distance from the guards. They reached the heart of the base within an hour, an enormous chamber filled with state-of-the-art equipment. In the center of the room stood what they had come for, a massive drilling machine, its surface covered in thick layers of insulation to keep it from freezing. Lena could hardly believe her eyes. This was no ordinary drilling rig. It was designed to extract energy in a way that was both unprecedented and terrifying. The sheer scale of the operation was enough to leave anyone breathless. "This is it," Lena whispered, her voice barely audible. "This is what they've been hiding." Kate stepped forward, examining the equipment. "This is more than just energy extraction. This is a new form of resource manipulation. If they succeed, they'll control the global energy supply and no one will be able to stop them." Darren's face darkened as he studied the machine. "And if it goes wrong, it will," Lena said, her voice grim. "It's too dangerous. We need to shut it down now." They approached the control panel, but as Lena reached for the main switch, a sharp voice echoed through the facility's intercom system. "Security breach. Intruders in Sector B. Lock down all access points." The alarm blared to life, echoing through the base. Red lights flashed, casting an ominous glow over everything. Lena's heart raced. They had been discovered. "Time's up," Kate said, her voice filled with urgency. "We need to go, now." Lena's mind raced as she grabbed the evidence they had collected from the control panel and stuffed it into her bag. "Let's move." The team sprinted down the hallway, but the sound of approaching footsteps sent a chill down Lena's spine. They had only moments before the base's security would be on them. The tight hallways and narrow corridors of the base had become a maze of confusion. Every turn felt like a dead end. They could hear the guards shouting in the distance, their voices growing louder. "We need to split up," Lena said, her voice sharp with urgency. "Kate, take the east exit. Darren, with me. Marcus, you cover us from the rear." Marcus hesitated but nodded. "Be careful." Lena didn't wait for another word. She grabbed Darren's arm, and the two of them veered off toward the western exit. Kate took the opposite route, disappearing into the shadows, her footsteps muffled by the snow. They reached the exit only to find a group of heavily armed guards waiting for them, their weapons drawn. Lena's heart skipped a beat. There was no way out. Without thinking, Darren pushed Lena behind him, drawing his own weapon in a flash. The guards didn't hesitate, they opened fire. Lena's instincts kicked in, and she ducked behind a metal pillar, adrenaline pumping through her veins. Darren returned fire, taking down one of the guards, but they were outnumbered. The odds were stacked against them. But just as the situation grew dire, a loud explosion rocked the base. The walls trembled, and a blinding light filled the hallway. The guards were momentarily distracted by the chaos. "Go! Go!" Lena shouted, pulling Darren toward a maintenance shaft at the end of the hallway. The explosion had blown open a path they could use to escape. They scrambled through the narrow shaft, the sound of the explosion still ringing in their ears. As they emerged into the snowstorm outside, the cold air hit them like a wall. They weren't out of danger yet, but at least they had escaped the immediate threat. Kate was already waiting for them at the rendezvous point, her face pale but determined. "Did you get it?" she asked, her voice steady despite the chaos. Lena nodded. "We've got the evidence. Now, let's get out of here." But as they made their way back to the extraction point, Lena knew that this was only the beginning. Cromwell Industries would stop at nothing to protect their power, and they would come after Lena and her team with everything they had. As the wind howled around them, Lena could already feel the storm brewing. Lena and her team made their way through the blinding snowstorm, their breaths shallow and quick, hearts racing. The evidence they had obtained from Cromwell Industries and #39, Arctic Base was invaluable, a goldmine of information that could bring down the entire corporate empire. But Lena knew this was only the beginning of a much bigger fight. The real battle was about to unfold. The snowstorm was a harsh reminder of how far they were from safety. Even though they had escaped the facility, they still had to contend with the elements, and the looming threat of Cromwell's retaliation. The storm could conceal their movements, but it also made every step feel more uncertain, every shadow more menacing. "Are we sure this is the right way?" Marcus asked, scanning the snowy landscape ahead. His eyes were trained on the horizon, constantly looking for any sign of pursuit. "We don't have a choice," Lena replied, trying to ignore the gnawing sense of urgency growing in her chest. "We need to get to the safe house." Once we're there, we can regroup and figure out our next move. The evidence has to get out. We'll leak it to the press, make it public. But if Cromwell catches up to us, Darren trailed off, his voice grim. He knew better than anyone the lengths the corporation would go to in order to silence their enemies. Lena met his eyes. Then we fight back. We expose them for everything they've done. We bring this whole thing into the light. By the time they reached the safe house, the wind had died down, but the cold still bit at their skin. The small cabin, hidden deep in the woods, was a far cry from the sterile facility they had just escaped, but it was safe, for now. The moment they stepped inside, the warmth of the fire felt like a distant memory. The tension in the air was thick, and Lena's mind was racing with the enormity of what they had just uncovered. Kate immediately set to work on the data they had obtained. This is bigger than we thought, she said, her voice barely a whisper as she typed furiously on her laptop. Cromwell Industries has been pulling strings all over the world. They've influenced entire governments, rigged elections, and have been secretly funding paramilitary groups to suppress any opposition. Their reach is global. Lena sank into a chair, her mind spinning with the implications. She had suspected Cromwell's influence was vast, but the scale of their operations was almost unfathomable. And Project Atlas? She asked. Kate's fingers paused over the keys as she brought up a schematic of the energy extraction machine they had discovered in the Arctic. It's a new kind of energy technology, one that can drain natural resources from the planet at an unsustainable rate. It doesn't just damage the environment, it accelerates climate change, destabilizes ecosystems, and creates a monopoly over energy production. And that's only the beginning. They've already started testing it in the Arctic, but if they deploy it worldwide, Lena clenched her fists, her jaw tightening. It's a death sentence for the planet. We can't let them get away with it. Marcus, who had been pacing by the window, turned toward them. We're going to need more than just this evidence. They'll bury it if we don't have the right backing. Lena knew he was right. Public outrage wouldn't be enough to take down a corporation like Cromwell. They would need to gather support from the highest levels, government agencies, international organizations, environmental groups, and they'd need to move fast. Every second that ticked by brought them closer to a full-scale global catastrophe. But there was something else they had to consider. The team had been on the run for days, and their movements had not gone unnoticed. Lena's mind flickered to the growing list of enemies. They couldn't stay hidden forever. They'll come for us, Darren said quietly, breaking through her thoughts. His eyes, dark with understanding, were fixed on her. They have resources, connections. They'll track us down, and they won't stop until we're silenced. You know that. Lena nodded. She had known from the start that this mission was going to cost her everything. The risks were monumental, but the stakes were even higher. The decision was made that night. They would release the evidence. They would expose Cromwell for what it was, an unchecked corporate monster with plans to destroy the planet for profit. They would need to use all of their resources, Kate's hacking skills, Marcus's connections, and Darren's experience navigating the dangerous world of corporate espionage. Together, they would make sure the truth came to light. They had to act fast. If they delayed any longer, they risked Cromwell completing the rollout of Project Atlas before anyone could stop them. We need to find a way to get this to the press without getting caught, Lena said. We can't trust anyone, but we can't do this alone. Kate, never one to back down from a challenge, nodded. I've got contacts in the underground. I can make it happen. I'll encrypt everything, make sure it gets to the right journalists. We can't afford a leak before it's out in the world. Marcus was already on the phone, reaching out to a network of trusted allies, people who had been part of their efforts to bring down Titan Energy in the past. I'll have the logistics covered. We'll need an international push, global news outlets, environmental organizations. We get them all on board. As Lena listened to the plans coming together, she felt a flicker of hope. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot they had. But just as they were about to finalize their strategy, Lena's phone buzzed. A news alert flashed across the screen: Cromwell Industries denies all allegations, files lawsuit against activists. Her heart sank. Cromwell was already on the offensive. They're going to try to discredit us, Lena muttered. But we can't let them intimidate us. We have to stay focused. Darren crossed his arms, his face stoic. They'll use every trick in the book. But we've got the truth on our side. And that's something they can't buy. Lena looked around at her team, a mixture of resolve and fear in their eyes. They had come this far, but the hardest part was still ahead. They were now public enemies, and there was no turning back. The following days were a blur of activity. Kate worked tirelessly to encrypt and disseminate the data, sending it to trusted journalists across the globe, while Marcus organized international support. They reached out to environmental groups, global NGOs, and even some government contacts who had been sympathetic to their cause. Lena and Darren took the most dangerous route, traveling between safe houses, always one step ahead of Cromwell's operatives. The battle had only just begun. The media coverage exploded worldwide, and while many outlets questioned the legitimacy of the claims, there was no denying the evidence. The tide was turning. People began to rally. Protests broke out in major cities, demanding justice for the environment, for the victims of Cromwell's greed, and for those who had risked everything to expose them. But even as the movement gained momentum, Lena knew they were still in the eye of the storm. Cromwell wasn't going to back down. They had too much at stake. Lena sat at a table in one of the safe houses, her mind clouded with worry. The war was far from over, and each new revelation brought new risks. But there was no turning back. They had taken the first step. Now, they just had to survive long enough to take the next. The pressure was mounting. Lena couldn't remember a time when the stakes had felt so high. Every moment, every decision, seemed to carry the weight of the world. As the media storm around Cromwell Industries grew, so did the risk of retaliation. Reports of government officials stepping down, environmental groups scrambling to protect their sources, and activists facing harsh crackdowns made it clear that they were all in this fight together, or they would fall one by one. Lena paced in the small, dimly lit safe house, trying to focus. Kate, exhausted but driven, was hunched over her laptop, while Marcus and Darren were reviewing encrypted messages, preparing for their next move. The atmosphere was tense, the kind of quiet before an inevitable clash. "Have you heard anything from our contacts?" Lena asked Marcus, her voice laced with frustration. They had been working around the clock to rally support, but every new development only seemed to bring more complications. Marcus glanced up from his phone, a look of concern on his face. "Some of the key players are being silenced. They're being threatened, or worse. Cromwell's reach is vast. They've even started spreading disinformation, creating fake news outlets to dilute the truth. It's hard to know who we can trust anymore." Lena clenched her jaw. "We knew this would happen. But we can't back down now." Kate spoke without looking up from her screen. "I've managed to get the data into the hands of some international environmental organizations. The story is out there, but it's going to take time for it to really spread. The media is slow to pick up on it, too many people are still on the fence. We can't afford to wait," Darren muttered, standing up from his corner and pacing toward the door. "If Cromwell gets their way, they'll finish what they started in the Arctic. And Project Atlas, if they deploy that technology on a global scale, we won't have time to stop it." Lena turned to face Darren, her mind racing. His words hit her like a punch to the gut. The future they had been fighting for was slipping further out of reach. Cromwell had the technology, the resources, and the means to enact their vision of a new world order. A world where they controlled not only the economy but the very environment itself. "We need to act before they launch," Lena said, determination flooding her voice. "We can't just rely on the media to carry this. We need to sabotage their plans directly. We need to hit them where it hurts." The plan they hatched was bold, reckless even. The only way to truly stop Project Atlas before it was fully deployed was to take out the facility where the technology was being perfected. The remote Arctic base had only been the beginning. Cromwell had multiple secret facilities around the world, each more heavily guarded and fortified than the last. But Lena had learned enough from their Arctic mission to know that these places were vulnerable. "We've got to hit them where it hurts," Kate said, eyes glinting with the fire of someone who had finally found purpose in the chaos. "I've been looking into Cromwell's global infrastructure. They've got a key site in South America, a research facility that's been working on a second prototype for Project Atlas. If we can take that out before it goes online, it'll delay them by years. It's the perfect target. Lena's stomach twisted. It was a dangerous move, but it was their best shot. Cromwell was preparing to scale their operation worldwide, and if they didn't act now, they would be too late. South America, Lena repeated, running through the details in her head. We'll need to get past the security perimeter. We'll need help, local operatives, safe houses, transport. We can't do it alone, Marcus agreed. We'll need to call in more allies. I'll make the arrangements. Darren was already packing his gear. I'll liaise with the ground team. We need boots on the ground, people who know the area. And we need to act fast. We're on a ticking clock. Lena felt the weight of their decision settle on her shoulders. This was no longer just a fight for environmental justice, it was a global war for the future of the planet. And they were about to walk straight into the heart of Cromwell's empire. The flight to South America was long and exhausting, but it gave Lena and her team time to refine their plan. Kate had managed to secure encrypted communications with local resistance groups, while Marcus had coordinated with a network of sympathetic insiders who would help them infiltrate Cromwell's research facility. As they landed in a remote jungle region, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that every moment of calm only brought them closer to the storm. The jungle stretched for miles around them, dense and untamed, a perfect place for Cromwell to hide its operations, hidden from prying eyes, shielded by nature's fortress. The facility was situated deep within the jungle, protected by a private militia, a vast network of surveillance, and a state-of-the-art security system. But Lena's team had learned how to adapt to these conditions. They had infiltrated high-security sites before. They just needed to be smarter than the enemy. Marcus, who had years of experience in covert operations, was already giving orders. We'll split into 2 teams. One will infiltrate from the north side of the facility while the other approaches from the south. Kate, you'll coordinate the hack from the command center. You'll disable their communications and security. Once we're in, we plant the explosives, grab the intel, and get out. Lena's mind raced. This was it. The culmination of everything they had been working toward. She felt the burden of their mission weighing heavily on her, but she couldn't afford doubt now. Not when so much was at stake. We'll do it fast and clean, Lena said, her voice firm. Once we plant the explosives, we'll have 5 minutes to exfiltrate the facility. No exceptions. Darren gave her a sharp nod. Understood. They set out into the jungle, the dense trees towering overhead, their path barely visible. The sounds of the jungle were overwhelming, the distant calls of animals, the rustle of leaves underfoot. But there was no turning back now. The infiltration went according to plan at first. Kate's hacking skills shut down the facility's security systems with eerie efficiency, and Marcus's connections within the local resistance allowed them to bypass some of the facility's outer defenses. But just as they were about to breach the final perimeter, an unexpected force threw their timing into chaos. We've been compromised. Kate's voice rang out through the comms. Someone tipped them off. The facility is on high alert. Lena cursed under her breath. They had anticipated resistance, but not this level of preparedness. Cromwell had clearly been expecting them. The countdown had begun. We need to move faster, Lena barked. Get to the control room. Kate, disable the prototype. There was no room for hesitation. They had come too far. Every second counted now. As they neared the inner chambers of the facility, the sound of gunfire echoed through the hallways. The guards had mobilized. The room ahead was the heart of the operation, the command center where the data on Project Atlas was stored. Lena felt a surge of adrenaline. Darren, cover me, she said, her voice low. Marcus, with me. The door to the command center was locked, but Kate had anticipated this. With a few quick keystrokes, the lock gave way. The room was filled with rows of monitors, screens flickering with information about the progress of Project Atlas. Get the data. Lena shouted, rushing toward the main terminal. I'll plant the charges. As she set the explosives on the walls, she heard the distinct sound of footsteps echoing in the hallway. They weren't alone. Get ready, Marcus said, a grim look in his eyes. This is it. Lena's pulse raced. She planted the last charge and signaled to Kate, who was frantically downloading the data. There was no time left. 5 minutes, Lena said. We move, now. The command center was a whirlwind of activity. Lena, heart pounding, watched as Kate's fingers flew across the keyboard, downloading the sensitive data they had come for. The tension in the air was palpable, and every passing second felt like an eternity. Almost there, Kate murmured under her breath, her face illuminated by the glow of the computer screens. I've got the prototype data. I'm sending it to the backups now. We need to get out, fast. Lena's eyes flicked to the security monitors overhead. They could hear the sounds of boots pounding. Down the hall, guards closing in, their heavy footsteps echoing like a death knell. They had no time left. Do it now, Kate. Lena snapped. We don't have 5 minutes. The explosions planted in the walls of the control room would give them the cover they needed to escape. But only if they acted immediately. Kate hit the final key, and the data transfer was complete. Without another word, she stood up, grabbing her gear. Done. Let's move. Follow me. Marcus yelled, leading the charge toward the exit. Lena and Darren were close behind, weapons drawn, every sense heightened as the sound of footsteps grew louder and closer. They had made it through the first layer of security, but now the real test began. The facility was on full lockdown. If they didn't get out soon, they would be trapped. Lena's mind raced as she processed their options. They had memorized the facility's blueprints before the mission, but even that couldn't predict the chaos of this moment. The guards would be everywhere, and if they got caught now, it would all be for nothing. There's an emergency tunnel to the south side, Marcus said, his voice steady, despite the chaos. If we get there, we can make our escape. It's a hidden route used for evacuations. We can be out in minutes. Lena nodded, her heart in her throat. They had one shot at this. The facility was large, sprawling over multiple levels, and as they moved through the hallways, Lena couldn't help but feel the creeping sense of doom. Every corner they turned felt like a trap, and the sound of shouting voices grew louder. Cromwell's forces were closing in. They reached the hallway leading to the tunnel, but just as they approached the door, a blast of gunfire rang out. A guard, hidden behind a stack of crates, fired at them. Lena threw herself to the ground, narrowly avoiding the bullets that whizzed by. Cover fire. Darren shouted, unleashing a hail of gunfire to suppress the enemy's advance. The sound of bullets pinging off walls filled the air, sharp and unforgiving. Move. Marcus shouted, gesturing toward the tunnel door. He had already started running. Lena could feel her pulse in her ears. The explosions they had planted were still ticking away, adding to the urgency of the situation. They had mere minutes before the facility went up in flames. Kate, open the door. Lena yelled. She could see Kate struggling with the locking mechanism. I'm working on it. Kate's voice was strained, her face pale. Come on, come on. Darren kept firing, his back pressed against the wall as he held off the guards. Sweat trickled down his face, but he didn't let up. We're not going to make it if we don't get moving now. Finally, with a loud click, the emergency exit slid open, revealing the darkened tunnel. It was narrow and unlit, but it was their only way out. Go. Lena yelled, motioning for everyone to follow. They poured into the tunnel, the echo of their footsteps barely audible over the noise of gunfire and explosions behind them. The world above them was chaotic, but this small passageway felt like their only thread to survival. The tunnel stretched for miles, and though it was dark, Lena's team moved quickly, driven by the sheer urgency of their mission. The air felt thick, the walls closing in around them, but they pushed forward, not daring to look back. They reached a small opening that led to the jungle outside. As they emerged, they were met with the bitter taste of the cold air. The jungle was quiet now, too quiet. The sounds of the jungle had been drowned out by the distant rumble of the explosions inside the facility. But they weren't safe yet. The moment they stepped into the clearing, Lena heard the unmistakable sound of helicopters approaching. They're here, Marcus said, grimly. We need to move, now. They sprinted through the dense jungle, the sound of helicopter blades growing louder. The forest seemed to close in around them, the shadows playing tricks on their eyes. It was hard to tell if they were being followed or if the helicopters were searching for them at random, but they couldn't afford to take the chance. Lena's heart pounded in her chest as they ducked behind a large cluster of trees. The helicopters were getting closer. "They're coming for us," Darren said, breathless. "We have to keep moving." Lena could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. They had the data, the evidence they needed to bring down Cromwell, but they couldn't afford to be caught now. It was a race against time, and they were losing ground. The team reached a small clearing, where an old, abandoned transport vehicle was hidden beneath some foliage. It wasn't much, but it was their best chance at escaping. As they approached the vehicle, the sound of approaching helicopters grew deafening. They had moments, perhaps seconds, before they were spotted. "Get in!" Lena shouted, her voice urgent. She was the last one to jump into the vehicle, slamming the door behind her. Kate was already in the driver's seat, her fingers gripping the wheel tightly. "Go, go, go!" Lena urged. The engine sputtered to life as Kate floored the accelerator. The vehicle lurched forward, crashing through the underbrush, its wheels slipping in the mud. Behind them, the helicopters circled, their searchlights sweeping across the jungle floor. For a moment, Lena thought they might make it, until a burst of gunfire rang out, striking the vehicle's rear tire. The car swerved, and Kate struggled to maintain control. "We're not going to make it like this," Darren yelled, his voice filled with panic. "Hold on," Kate shouted, gunning the engine. They tore through the jungle, narrowly avoiding trees and rocks. The sound of the helicopter's engines grew louder, and Lena's pulse quickened. They couldn't outrun them forever. Then, as if by a miracle, a sudden explosion rocked the air, a series of explosions that shook the earth beneath them. "What the hell?" Marcus gasped, looking over his shoulder. The helicopters were forced to pull back, dodging the blasts. Lena's heart skipped a beat. "The charges. They went off early." Kate steered the vehicle sharply to the right, pulling them off the main road and down a small, barely visible path. For the first time in what felt like hours, the sound of helicopters faded. They had made it. The explosions had bought them enough time to slip away, leaving Cromwell's forces in disarray. As they drove deeper into the jungle, they dared not stop. The vehicle's tires were worn, the engine sputtering from the damage, but it had carried them far enough to be out of immediate danger. Lena slumped back in her seat, her mind spinning with everything that had happened. They had succeeded in acquiring the data on Project Atlas, and now, with the world watching, they had a chance to expose Cromwell for their global conspiracy. But there was still so much left to do. The fight was far from over. "We did it," Kate said quietly, glancing back at the team. Lena nodded, though she knew this was just the beginning. Cromwell would stop at nothing to silence them, but with the data now in the hands of trusted allies and journalists, they had a shot at bringing the truth to light. But the road ahead was long, and the battle was far from over. As they disappeared into the dense jungle, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that they had only just begun to uncover the depth of the corruption they were fighting. And no matter what it took, they would see it through to the end. The days following their narrow escape were a blur of movement and uncertainty. Lena and her team knew that they couldn't stop now, not when the world was depending on them. They had managed to get the data out of Cromwell's hands, but the corporation wasn't about to let their secrets be exposed without a fight. For the first time in weeks, Lena allowed herself to breathe. They had made it through a war zone, dodged the reach of Cromwell's military-grade security, and brought the truth to light. But now, they had to ensure that truth was heard, loudly and unequivocally. Their first move was to contact their allies, international environmental organizations, journalists, and government officials who had been following their story. It didn't take long for the explosive data to ripple across the globe. The revelations were too big to ignore. Project Atlas was more than just a corporate conspiracy, it was a global threat that, if left unchecked, could alter the very fabric of the environment for generations to come. The world reacted with shock and outrage. Protests erupted in major cities, calling for immediate action. Politicians scrambled to distance themselves from Cromwell, whose CEO, Arthur Cromwell, went into hiding, his empire beginning to crack under the weight of the scandal. But even as Lena celebrated their success, she knew the fight was far from over. Cromwell Industries had deep roots, financially, politically, and socially, and they would not go down without a fight. It was a week after the data leak when Lena received an encrypted message from Marcus. The news was worse than she had anticipated. "They've gone dark," Marcus said. "The board members and key executives at Cromwell are disappearing. It's like they've already planned their escape. And we've just learned, Cromwell's infrastructure wasn't the only thing they were building. They've developed a backup plan. A final play. If they can't control the planet's resources, they're planning to take the resources with them. There's a secondary prototype for Project Atlas, one that they were hiding. It's not just about environmental control, it's about mass destruction." Lena's stomach twisted. It was worse than they thought. "We've exposed them," Lena said firmly, "but we need to finish this. We need to destroy the backup prototype before it's activated. If Cromwell deploys this new weapon, it'll be too late for any of us to stop it." Kate was already at her computer, gathering intel. "I've hacked into Cromwell's internal network again. I've pinpointed the location of the second prototype. It's deep in an underground facility in the Pacific. If we don't act now, they'll use it to bring the entire world to its knees." Lena clenched her fists. They had exposed the truth, but the war for the planet was not won. The final blow to Cromwell would have to come from within their strongest hold. The mission was dangerous, but they had no choice. Lena, Marcus, Darren, Kate, and a small group of trusted allies prepared for the final assault. They couldn't allow Cromwell to use the secondary prototype, which was capable of causing irreversible environmental damage at a global scale. The underground facility was located on a remote island, a high-security site protected by armed mercenaries and advanced surveillance. It was nearly impossible to breach, but that's exactly why it was the perfect target. The journey was grueling, but as the team arrived at the island, they found that their worst fears were already beginning to come true. Satellite images revealed the facility was being prepared for launch. Cromwell had made their final move. "We don't have much time," Lena said, her voice low but urgent. "We hit them hard and fast. We have one shot at this." As they moved through the dense jungle surrounding the facility, Kate worked quickly to disable surveillance systems. Marcus led the group with military precision, navigating the terrain as if he knew every step. The closer they got to the facility, the more the tension mounted. Their lives, along with the future of the planet, depended on this mission succeeding. They reached the facility's perimeter in the dead of night, the faint hum of machinery the only sound they could hear. But as they got closer to the gates, an alarm suddenly blared. "Shit," Marcus muttered, pulling them back into the shadows. "They know we're here," Darren said, his voice grim. Lena's heart raced. "We're committed now. No turning back." They fought their way inside, taking down guards and evading cameras. Kate's hacking skills gave them the edge they needed to breach the security systems, but time was slipping away. The countdown had begun. The final prototype of Project Atlas was about to go live, and if they didn't stop it, they'd all be too late. Inside the facility, they found the prototype, a massive machine, covered in protective casing, humming with energy. The prototype was connected to an advanced AI system designed to take control of Earth's atmosphere, manipulating weather patterns, seismic activity, and ocean currents on a global scale. "We've got minutes," Lena said. "Kate, can you disable it?" Kate nodded, her hands flying over her laptop, working furiously to hack into the system controlling the prototype. "I've got to break the encryption. Just hold them off." Outside, the sound of reinforcements arriving made their mission even more urgent. Lena could hear the heavy boots of soldiers marching down the hallway toward them. They were running out of time. Just as the countdown neared its final moments, Lena heard a familiar voice. "Well, well, well," Arthur Cromwell said, stepping into the room with a cold, sinister smile. "I should have expected you would make it this far, Lena." Lena turned to face him, her eyes narrowed. "It's over, Cromwell. You can't control the world any longer." He chuckled, his expression one of amusement. "You're naive, Lena. The world doesn't need to be controlled by one man, it needs to be reset. You're too short-sighted to understand. Project Atlas isn't about power. It's about saving humanity from itself. It's the only way." Lena stepped forward, her voice steady. "By destroying the planet?" You're a madman. This isn't salvation. This is destruction. Cromwell's eyes darkened. You think you can stop me? You've already lost. But Lena was done talking. She lunged forward, knocking the gun from Cromwell's hand before he could react. A fight ensued, fast, brutal, and desperate. Every second counted, and Lena knew that every move had to be precise. As Cromwell struggled to regain control, Lena saw Kate's hand flash across the console, typing in the final command. "It's done," Kate said, her voice tight with relief. "The prototype's offline. It's over." Cromwell's face twisted in rage as the machine powered down. The countdown stopped, and the hum of the facility fell silent. "You think you've won?" Cromwell spat. "You're a fool. You've only delayed the inevitable." Before Lena could respond, security flooded the room, but they were too late. The data had been wiped from the prototype systems, the facility was now under control, and Cromwell's empire was crumbling. The aftermath of the final battle was chaotic, but Lena and her team emerged victorious. Cromwell was arrested, his vast network of corruption unraveled, and the world finally had the proof it needed to dismantle his empire. The data they had exposed brought global leaders to the table, demanding corporate accountability and urgent environmental reform. In the following months, Project Atlas was publicly dismantled, its components seized, and the remaining pieces of Cromwell's network exposed. Lena's team became the face of a new movement for environmental justice, one that focused on sustainable solutions and corporate transparency. As for Lena, she continued to fight for the planet, now a global icon in the battle for environmental protection. But she knew that the work would never truly be finished. There were still battles to fight, injustices to expose, and a world to save. But now, at least, they had a chance. And that was enough. The battle may be over for now, but the war is far from finished. The truth is out there, waiting to be uncovered, and the fight for the future continues. What happens next? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain, no one can stop the pursuit of justice. We want to hear from you. What are your theories on what Lena and her team will face next? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, let's get the conversation going. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more incredible stories. Hit the bell so you never miss an update, and stay tuned as we continue to bring you the latest in the fight for truth and justice. Thanks for watching, and remember, our journey together has just begun.